We're back at it again with another Battlefront update. With the January game update delayed until next Monday, DICE today have released their last community transmission for the sequel Trilogy era. In this transmission, we get all the details regarding BB8 and BB90, some quality of life improvements, hero changes, bug fixes, and so on, you know, the usual spiel. Along with that, DICE have as well officially confirmed that the original Trilogy, aka the Age of Rebellion, will be their main focus come February, including the return of Scarif from Battlefront 2015. A surprise to be sure, but a welcome one. Then again, there is a rather devious reason for its inclusion, which we'll get into later. As always, we'll be covering all of this and more in today's video. And before we get into any of that, but a quick reminder, as if you do like these type of videos, then do remember to give it a like to show your support for not only this update series, but also the content within it. With that out of the way, let's get into it. Jumping straight into the news, we'll first be taking a look at the community transmission that was put out earlier today. And it's jam-packed with more information than normal. Let's take a look at the new heroes dropping into the game next week on Monday. First, BB8, the new hero for the Resistance. And if there's one thing BB8 can do, it's move real fast. We've seen him rolling at great speeds throughout the multiple environments in the films, and he'll act the same way in Star Wars Battlefront 2. He will feel fast, able to move in and out of harm's way at speed, while also being able to capture a command post at a quicker rate than others. Along with his ability to capture command posts, BB8 comes with another advantage, his rolling charge ability. Activated, and BB8 will roll much faster than normal, head first. When he bumps into an enemy, he extends his head, damaging and pushing them back. And if BB8 finds himself in a position he can't zoom out of, he can use his shock prod on enemies in front of him, which deals electrical damage to them over time. Always one to have a few tricks ready to go, BB8 can also call upon his resistance backing ability, which unveils enemies around him. And not only will they be revealed, but they'll also be more vulnerable to attacks, taking slightly increased damage. Any enemies revealed by resistance backing will also have their radar corrupted. Rounding off his abilities is Cable Spin, where BB8 will begin to rotate, extending 3 tow cables, hitting all enemies around him and causing high damage. Similar to BB8, the First Order counterpart is BB90, which will have a primary weapon that is centered around its shock prod, which stuns enemies periodically and deals damage over time. BB90 has a number of abilities based on utility, the first of which is Smokescreen. Upon activation, dense smoke will be emitted from BB90 through the grids on its body, revealing enemies around him for the duration of the active time. His second utility-based ability is Charge Up, which emits a pulse that places his shock prod and all nearby friendly blasters into super success mode. This will cause ally units to no longer generate heat on their blasters, and will reduce their ability recharge time. The third ability of BB90's is Shock Spin. When used, BB90 will spin and release an electrical pulse that pushes and damages enemies that are nearby. Any enemies that are further away will have their blasters overheated. Next week's game update will also see the sequel trilogy's Age of Resistance be fully implemented into supremacy mode, which will include 2 new capital ships to the game, the MC-85 Star Cruiser and the Resurgent class Star Destroyer. 3 planets will be available to play in the Age of Resistance supremacy mode, Ajan Klas, Jakku, and Takodana. Each of these planets will be available in instant action too, allowing you to play the supremacy experience offline. As for why I kept saying supremacy here instead of capital supremacy, well then that's something I'll get into later because trust me, there is a reason for this. Also mentioned in my previous videos, the long-awaited era selector option for supremacy mode will be available in next week's update. Using this selector, players will have the option to choose between both the Age of Republic or Age of Resistance maps to play in supremacy mode. DICE have also confirmed the introduction of new auto-player reinforcements arriving in next week's update as well. Now auto-players will be able to play as droidekas on all planets and across all game modes that support them. Vehicle autoplayers are still of course in the works, but are expected to come out next now that the droidekas have been completed and released. Going into the quality of life changes, there are a few to make mention of here, such as updated hit markers, explosive damage reduction, flame trooper range UI, among others. For hit markers, DICE have created a new unique hit marker from the attacker's point of view for explosive and melee damage. For explosive damage reduction, DICE have now added the same in-game messaging for this that they have used for the normal damage reduction. The Flame Trooper user interface will now be getting a new element that shows the Flame Trooper range briefly when you start firing the flame. The Ovisian Gunner is now getting a spool-up functionality for her weapon. Just hold zoom to spool up the weapon, ensuring that it's ready to fire immediately when you find a target. Lastly, DICE have also tweaked the Heavy Trooper's sentry abilities to be more in line with the Ovisian Gunner. Its passive timer has been removed, and the spool-up functionality has been applied to all sentry weapons and activated by holding down the zoom button. Next up, the hero changes. The general ones are as follows: added ability Crosshair for Kylo Ren's Frenzy and Palpatine's Chain Lightning, fixed an issue that would not allow Darth Maul and Darth Vader to throw their lightsaber during a voice line action, fixed what would cause some of the abilities of Luke Skywalker, Darth Maul, and Yoda to affect enemies through objects, fixed a bug that would prevent players from getting kill assists for multiple buff abilities that helped allies killing an enemy. User interface range for various abilities is now white when it affects enemies, and yellow when it affects ally players. And intro animations for heroes in the spawn and front-end screen have been improved. Now regarding specific hero changes in the patch notes, we've got them only for Grievous, Rey, Vader, Palpatine, Anakin, Dooku, Yoda, Luke, Iden, Finn, Han, and Bossk. Grievous's problem that saw him drain too much stamina from an opposing player when using Unrelenting Advanced is gone. Rey's Mind Trick ability will now apply visual effects vignette around the screen of the affected player. Vader is now able to attack and block while choking, and he won't remain stuck in the choke animation if he used choke and dash immediately after. Palpatine is getting his slow movement removed for Dark Aura, as well as single and double hand damage along with his chain lightning radius are seeing noticeable value decreases. As for Anakin, well, he's getting nerfed straight to the grave as expected. His pressure star card value is reduced from 10, 20, 30, 40 to 10, 15, 20, and 25. This and a reduced Passionate Strike first strike damage on troopers and reinforcements from 130 to 70. Reduced Passionate Strike damage on troopers and reinforcements from 250 to 180. The base damage of heroic impact to troopers and reinforcements reduced from 120 to 100. Dooku will also be seeing a yellow circle around his crosshair to show when he has a critical hit available with his initiative star card. Yoda's presence will now display the right amount of friendly characters who are affected, and this ability will also apply in mid-air. However, Yoda will no longer be able to receive a jumping advantage while using abilities in mid-air. The same applies to Luke Skywalker too with his push ability, and Iden's droid shield will also be able to be manually deactivated now. Finn's A Fight You Can Win milestone tracking progress has now been fixed in co-op when eliminating First Order troopers. And Han Solo's shoulder charge ability has increased its damage to troopers from 150 to 200. Meanwhile for Bossk, it's pretty much everything I already covered in the last video with the UI elements of the proximity mines, multi-trap star card equipped, and predatory instincts active time fix. So nothing really new there that I haven't already previously covered. Lastly, DICE have also made the announcement in this transmission that next month they'll be officially focusing on original trilogy content, aka the Age of Rebellion. Like mentioned many times before, there were a lot of questions on what DICE would be doing in February, original trilogy or Clone Wars Season 7 content. I said in my last video that I couldn't see DICE randomly ending their break off the Clone Wars just to later go back on break again to add the original trilogy content. So hearing the news that DICE are indeed doing what I said they would do isn't too surprising to hear. What is surprising is with the addition of adding original trilogy era maps, the Supremacy, Co-op, and Instant Action, DICE will also be bringing back Scarif from Battlefront 2015. This move makes sense because when the prequel and sequel era were added to Capital Supremacy, they each got a new map for that mode. So it's only logical that the original trilogy era would get its own new map for that mode too. Not to mention that DICE have already had the Scarif assets in the game since day one, as Scarif did appear in the single-player campaign, so adding it into multiplayer now is a no-brainer. It also wouldn't even surprise me too if they added the Shore Trooper skin into multiplayer as well, because like Scarif, that's also in the game files. If anything, we'll be finding out more about that next month. Now, as for the sudden name change of Capital Supremacy to only Supremacy mode, well, that's all due to a change DICE are doing with its original Trilogy offerings. And let me tell you now, it's not a good one. Basically, DICE are getting rid of the capital ship phase in Supremacy mode, but only for the original Trilogy maps. So the prequel and sequel era maps will still have a capital ship phase in Supremacy, but the original Trilogy maps will be ground phase exclusive only. DICE's excuse for this is because it would be too hard to imagine leaving the Death Star to go to a capital ship, which, I'm sorry, but I gotta call bull on that lame excuse. Sure, if you can't imagine adding a capital ship phase to the Death Star map, then here's a bright idea. Don't add the Death Star 2 map to Capital Supremacy. Supremacy mode. Notice how DICE aren't adding Starkiller Base to Supremacy for the sequel era, yet strangely are persistent in doing so for the original Trilogy era with the Death Star. Battlefront 2 has currently a total of 6 original Trilogy maps in the game, 7 if we count Jabba's Palace, which includes both interiors and exteriors, with only one of those being the Death Star map. So because of one map, DICE are going to ruin the entire experience for the other 6 or 7 perfectly capable capital ship phase maps. As for the new map Scarif, then who cares about the shields covering the planet? I mean, are DICE suddenly now caring about canon in multiplayer? Which is weird because they added Agent Claws as a Supremacy map and no battle ever took place in canon there. So by all means, remind me why the sequel era gets a pass here while the original Trilogy doesn't. Even then, just disable the shields for the map and still have the capital ship phase, especially seeing as there are a bunch of capital ships fighting over Scarif 2. Now, is it because DICE are a bunch of lazy devs that they're screwing over the original Trilogy? Not necessarily. If anything, it's very evident that they're trying to rush through the original Trilogy era just to get back to making Clone Wars content again, using assets already present in the game to add Scarif rather than something original like Mimban for example, and purposefully making up excuses to remove the capital ship phase saying that it's impossible to do, yet doing the exact opposite for the sequel era. Which, when you think about it, it was even more impossible to do in the sequel era considering how small and tiny the Resistance was. Even if they wanted to reuse assets, then give us Bespin or Sullust, both maps which already appear in the game and are perfectly capable for a capital ship phase. But no, this is all very deliberate by DICE. And as an original Trilogy fan, I gotta say I'm severely disappointed in DICE's intentional decision to half-ass this era, putting less content in there than the other eras in Supremacy mode. I mean, what can I say, this sucks. I know most Clone Wars fans won't even care, but all I have to say is imagine if this happened to you. If the prequel maps never got a capital ship phase while the other eras did. Wouldn't feel great, would it? Either way, at the end of the day, I'm still grateful that we're even getting something for my favorite era. But at the same time, as an original Trilogy fan, I can also voice my disappointment and call DICE out on their lies and disrespect for the Trilogy that gave us Star Wars as a whole. Anyways, rather than finishing this video off on a rant, I should point out that by the sounds of the transmission, only co-op mode for the Age of Rebellion will be coming in February. As it stated, the Supremacy maps will be coming later, which I'm going to assume he means March. So while the mode itself will be disappointing, hopefully at the very least DICE's choices and new reinforcements could make up for that, as they could very much be some pretty damn cool additions to the game. At least that's all we can really hope for now. But that'll do it for this Battlefront update. And as always, if you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel to not only support it, but keep up with Star Wars news, gaming, and canon lore released every week. And consider following me on Twitter and Facebook to never miss out on the latest Star Wars content. Thanks for watching, and may the Force be with you.